Good morning, and thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our series on the life and letters of the Apostle Peter. And today, we're in Matthew chapter 14. I want to begin today by thanking all the viewers out there. I thought I had a much smaller audience than I actually do, and some of you have been kind enough to comment on the Facebook page. I'm not on social media, so I didn't know. But I found out the other day that there are many more of you out there, so from now on I'll make a better effort. Anyway, thank you so much for your kind comments and for joining me for another 5 good minutes. We're going to be talking about Peter walking on the Sea of Galilee today. This is an event that happened immediately following the feeding of the 5,000. It's an event that's recorded here in Matthew, also in Mark and John. Curiously, it is not included at all in the Gospel of Luke, although the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000 is in all 4 Gospels. One of the few things, apart from the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, that make it into all 4 Gospels. And curiously, it is only Matthew that tells us about Peter's attempt to walk on the water towards Jesus. It's really curious that it doesn't end up in Mark, which we'll talk about in a few days. But anyway, we're in Matthew chapter 14, immediately following the feeding of the 5,000. The people are so happy with Jesus that they want to seize him and make him a king by force. And Jesus, who is always managing his public ministry to bring about the fullness of time, sends first the apostles away in a boat, gets them out of the area, and then Jesus himself withdraws to a mountain area where he spends the night in prayer. And then in the middle of the night, he comes walking to the apostles on the water towards the boat in the midst of a terrible gale that they're fighting. Let's not remember that maybe half of the apostles have been fishermen on the Sea of Galilee and are experienced fishermen, but also have a healthy respect for how treacherous that body of water can be. And it is the middle of the night. Okay, Matthew chapter 14, I'll begin reading with verse 22, and I'm going to read through verse 36, the end of the chapter. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side, while he sent the multitude away. And after he had sent the multitude away, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. And when it was evening, he was there alone. But the boat was already many stadia from the land, battered by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, that's the middle of the night, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them walking on the sea. And the disciples saw him walking on the sea and were frightened, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out for fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid." And Peter answered him and said, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." And he said, "Come." And Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came toward Jesus. But seeing the wind, he became afraid and began to sink. And he cried out, "Lord, save me." And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and took hold of him and said to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got back into the boat, the wind stopped. And those who were in the boat worshipped him, saying, "You are certainly God's Son." And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret, and the men of that place recognized him, and they sent into all the surrounding district and brought him all who were sick, and began to entreat him that he might just touch the fringe of the cloak, and as many as touched it were cured. Touching the fringe of the garment, this will come into play later on. That's why I wanted to read on past the story to the end of the chapter. Well, this is the second time Peter's left his boat to come to Jesus, to follow Jesus, to be with Jesus, and he'll do this a 3rd time. In fact, we can almost sum up the discipleship of Peter during Jesus' public ministry by talking about the 3 events where Peter leaves his boat. It's just so visual. It's a sensory experience, this story. You can hear the wind. And Matthew really accomplishes that. And And you can hear people when they talk to Jesus and he talks to them, speaks in very short phrases because they're screaming at each other, you know, across the billowing sea and the winds. And it's amazing, this event by itself. But then for Peter to say, if it's you, tell me to come. And Jesus tells him to come, and he gets out of the boat. It's almost impossible for me to imagine a boat on waves that are contrary and a guy stepping on to those waves and then standing on those waves and not being knocked over when the thing that you're walking on is undulating, and coming steps to Jesus. But then breaks the eye contact. He looks away and he's afraid, and he begins to sink. He doesn't plunge right in. It's not the normal effect of gravity. He begins to sink, and he cries out to Jesus, which is the thing he ought to do. Lord, save me. And Jesus takes him by the hand and pulls him up, and the two of them together walk on the water and get back in the boat. And as soon as they're in the boat, calm. It's an amazing account. So many lessons to learn from it about the risks we take because of our faith, which aren't really risks at all, that defy not only human logic, but even the laws of nature at times. And then there's the moment that contact is broken and everything falls apart, but it doesn't fall apart immediately. It's gradual. And then there's the crying out to Jesus to save us, and he always does. He always does. And then there is this about Peter, and I want to say this because we're about to hit our 7th minute of our 5 good minutes. It's the magnetic pull of Jesus. If there's one thing about Jesus, about Peter that's true in his relationship to Jesus, it's that magnetic pull. It's that he has to be where Jesus is. It's that he cannot be separated from Jesus. That's the leitmotif, that's the theme of Peter. It's that he is drawn to Jesus as the Christ, as the Son of God. Well, you've taken 7.5 minutes of your time this morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes. And tomorrow we're going to be talking about Peter's confession. I believe, yes, that's correct. We'll see you then.